Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the FinTech Insider Breakfast Show. My name is David Brear, and I think this is episode 119 now, which is a bit of an impressive feat, I have to say. Sorry for being a couple of minutes late. I had a couple of technical difficulties, but we're here with you now, aren't we? Which is good. So, in this show, as you know, we bring you the best and the brightest from around the fintech and banking landscape every single weekday, straight into your homes, from here on LinkedIn. So today we're going to be joined by Judith Pinto, who is the managing director of Promontory Financial Group. Promontory, I really have difficulty saying, Judith, so you're going to have to you're going to have to guide me through that one a few times in terms of the setup. But on today's show, what we're going to be doing is taking a look at how the IBM public cloud has been supporting the guys, and actually really what using cloud actually means within financial services, because banks have been talking about cloud for a long time, but actually the push and the changes, the technology really feels like it's getting there. So good morning, Judith. Anyway, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, David. Glad to be here.
And where is here? I know I was saying this just before we went live, but like that is a beautiful background you've got there. Like the wood paneling and everything is amazing.
No, thank you. No, I'm lucky to be just north of New York City, about 2 hours north, in the Hudson Valley, along the Hudson River, and live in a converted barn. So this was built in 1847. As you and I were talking, it's rare to hear that in the U.S., having a structure that old, but we're very lucky to have this and have the beautiful scenery around.
Well, if we get through all the other things that we want to talk about, like a walking tour of like such a barn, I think would be like a really interesting thing to do. But again, thank you for joining us. As always, folks who are watching this over on LinkedIn, we love getting your questions. So drop them into the sidebar and we'll be answering them live for you today. So, I mean, Judith, why don't we start with talking a little bit about you and your background? I mean, how did you end up being the managing director at Promontory?
Sure. I lead our cyber, cloud, and operational resilience practice, and I joined Promontory about 6 years ago. I had a colleague I had worked with who came here to start the cybersecurity practice, and so I had been a consultant before, had worked in banking, and I thought this would be a good combination of my skills to work in the cyber and cloud practice. So prior to Promontory, I spent about 9 years at Goldman Sachs in business information risk and business continuity. And so this was a good use of my skills to help build a practice here at Promontory.
Fantastic. So no stranger to financial services then, right?
No, not at all. And very much aware of the challenges that banks have in looking to migrate to the cloud.
And maybe talk about that a little bit more, because obviously, I mean, the connection between you and what IBM are doing from a cloud perspective. Can you sort of explain the connection there between the two?
Sure. So IBM acquired Promontory nearly 4 years ago, and part of that acquisition was to build out some capabilities around fintech. Part of that also was, partnering to see how we could enhance the cloud platform to be more attractive to banks in order to encourage them to migrate workload over. In addition, we've done a lot around the regulatory space, not only from a cybersecurity perspective, but we have a number of colleagues at Promontory who are former regulators. So they've partnered with IBM to build out solutions around AML and financial crimes, in addition to the work we were doing with cloud.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because I mean, while lots of organizations have pretty big aspirations for what these things can do, like I say, it's giving people those security all the way through this. I don't mean security as in digital security. I mean feeling secure that they're moving to something that actually will support their business, right? So for the uninitiated in that side of things, there's a lot of different terminology, isn't there? The private cloud, public cloud, but like, what is IBM's public cloud?
Yeah, so IBM's public cloud is a unique offering in the fact that we have addressed a number of regulatory requirements, adding additional controls that banks typically have to design themselves, implement themselves. They come by default in the cloud environment. So as announced last year, we've partnered with Bank of America to define what those requirements are, to build out what we like to call a policy framework that aligns with regulatory expectations. And that's unique for a public cloud environment. You had mentioned private cloud before. Because of the hesitancies that banks have had, they've had a tendency to build out private clouds because they can control that environment. They feel it's much more secure because they operate everything. And so they've been very hesitant about public cloud because they're reliant on the cloud provider to ensure that those controls are in place. What we've done is to build that in. Banks don't have to define that. It's a standard set of requirements that will meet, any bank's requirements for maintaining regulatory compliance.
It's interesting. I mean, you started with a small bank nobody'd heard of, Bank of America.
Yes.
Just if you're going to do it, you might as well do it with a gigantic organization, right? But it's fascinating though, because it's to your point. It's the benefit of cloud technology, and the benefit of cloud is actually by being able to use something that solves the needs in a commoditized way, isn't it? But actually,
Correct.
if a banking organization has to then customize all of the things that they need to then meet their needs, then it sort of defeats the point of it in the first place. So you kind of need to get to that point where the benefits of the cloud that's being offered is fundamentally meeting those needs, and not just the needs as in what they want it to be, but as you say, from a regulatory perspective, there are very clearly a bunch of restrictions that banks have with using cloud technology.
Right. And in Europe, the EBA has a set of cloud guidelines that banks need to adhere to in order to, operate in the cloud environment. And it's difficult in the public cloud environment because there's a lack of transparency on those controls. We've tried to solve that problem with the IBM cloud offering, in that we will provide transparency and be able to, address those concerns that regulators have, that banks have, about how these controls operate. Are they operating effectively? And be much more open about that than most public clouds, are today.
Yeah, it's an interesting one as well, the indirect impact of this, because it's not just about actually, Bank of America deciding to put Bank of America's systems in the cloud, but I mean the indirect nature of this, because more and more capabilities becoming SaaS. So,
Yes.
those sort of indirect software vendors that actually people really want to use this analytics capability or this CRM system, but if it's not sitting in a place that can really be stood up and secure, either from a data perspective or just from a security perspective, that's really a disarming thing for the banks, isn't it? So I know you guys are, you're not just working with big banks, are you? There's lots of software vendors in the mix here.
Correct. And we are doing that because we want to help the banks solve a problem that they've been struggling with for years. Is yes, they want to take advantage of those SaaS providers and ISVs. The challenge they've had is, one, assessing those vendors to ensure that they can comply with the security requirements that the banks have, and two, this sort of the ongoing oversight of those. So we've built out this platform and where we can support those SaaS providers in implementing those controls and monitoring compliance to those controls. And that way, that enables the bank to, reduce their overall compliance costs and compliance, workload, because a lot of that's being done now by IBM. And hopefully this enables them to use more of these SaaS providers, because everybody who's operating in this cloud environment has to adhere to the same set of controls. And that way, regulators also have the comfort of knowing that these SaaS providers are being held to those controls, and that there's oversight to ensure that they maintain compliance.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's it's the technology growing up in a sense to allow really heavily regulated industries to really get the benefit of all of those things. Because I mean, really, cloud is such a gigantic move forward for open source technology. And actually banks have, as you said earlier on, have been used to being very contained, within their four walls and their moats, so actually being able to use open source technology and all the benefits that brings is really significant for changing how their operation really operates.
Absolutely, absolutely, because now there's sort of a safe and secure environment in which to do this in. Prior to this, they've really, been hesitant about leveraging some of those newer technologies because they're unable to demonstrate to their regulators that they can meet the controls. And so this platform enables them to do that because everybody is sort of operating under the same set of rules, and they're required to in order to operate in this environment.
Agree. So, I mean, what's the response been then from the banking side? Because, I mean, again, I've heard a lot of people talk about this back over the years. Really, I mean, I've seen many startups start obviously in the cloud. Many banks still worrying about where their data centers are, but obviously
Right.
that's changing quite dramatically in terms of the last couple of years. So, what's been the response from the big banks?
The response has been phenomenal, not just from the big banks, but I would say, a lot of response from the smaller institutions that don't have the personnel to deploy workload in the cloud like the larger institutions can. And so we're seeing a broad range of interest from all size institutions. But something you had mentioned before is we're seeing a lot of interest from other regulated industries as well.
Mm,
There's a huge interest within banking, but we've gotten requests, from healthcare companies and insurance companies who also need to operate in a controlled environment, and they're wondering, can this environment work for them as well? The controls that are in place, are they applicable to their industry?
mm.
And the answer to that is yes, because we're using sort of a standard, set of controls that align with NIST, a standard that most institutions are familiar with. But yes, like I said, a broad range of banking institutions have shown interest. And this does, like I said, help solve the problem for the smaller institutions that may not have the personnel to manage workload in the cloud or to oversee those SaaS providers, for example. So this really enables them to quickly to innovate and to take advantage of the technologies.
It's interesting, isn't it? As you say, I remember bank grade used to be a term that was really positive. Do you know what I mean? It's
Hmm.
like this security is bank grade, and it's like, wow, that's
Right.
amazing. So now the fact that we're advancing these technologies, cutting edge technologies, that actually it's almost reinvigorating that as a terminology again, isn't it? In terms of that then is applicable to all of these different industries that would benefit from it, which is good. But I mean, one thing that we're definitely seeing, and I think we're seeing this all over the planet, really, is not only is this is banks being initiated by other banks to do these types of things, but obviously fintech has much more broadly raised the bar when it comes to the approaches for going about taking opportunities or bringing products to market. I mean,
Absolutely.
how do you see that the banks are kind of adapting to that fintech way of thinking?
Yeah, they are really wanting to be responsive. Their customers are, comparing the services or the technologies they use from the bank with technologies that they use in their everyday life, whether that's Amazon or Netflix or any of those types of things. And they want their bank to be as innovative as some of these other things that they're seeing. That's the reason why we're seeing so much in the fintech space is all of this innovation, addressing those customer demands for, the newest bright shiny toy. The banks want to take advantage of that as well. And so they need an environment that allows them to innovate rapidly and to connect with some of these fintechs in a safe way.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's I very much see from the conversations that we have, banks are the really big organizations are facing into sort of two ends of this challenge, which is the growing expectations of the customers to provide increasingly more sophisticated capability and quicker. We're all used to our phones every 20 minutes updating and the apps and the
Right.
capability getting better. But equally on the other end of that spectrum, facing into real pressures from an operational cost perspective that they need to address. And this is where, cloud technology solves both of those problems in such a significant way, doesn't it?
It does. It does. And, it also reduces the cost for the banks because they're not having to build all of this in-house and build it, in their private cloud. They
Mm,
can take advantage of the technologies that are available in this environment. When you have this interconnectedness of SaaS providers and fintechs and ISVs, it allows them to innovate more quickly and at a lower cost.
yeah. It's interesting. One of the questions that's just cropped up over on LinkedIn. So, do you see the effects of this not just on a technology side of things, but does this affect how the organization's actually structured? So, does it have a cultural effect?
It absolutely does. We're seeing this being easier for risk managers. So, banks have, risk management departments, and part of their remit is to oversee technology risks.
Mm,
And there have been, that's been one of the sort of the blockers for migrating to the cloud is understanding how you can continue to manage that risk. So we're seeing a tighter integration with that, but this also, this platform enables those, the risk managers to have the data that they need to say, yes, we're managing our technology risk in this environment. So
mm.
absolutely, we're seeing, a sort of a closer integration of risk managers into the technology risk organization.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that knock-on effect? Because I think this is, there's a couple of comments on the in LinkedIn. Is I think this is the missing thing that when a really big organization looks at a Facebook or an Apple or a Google in this world, it's like actually it's not what they do, it's the way that they do it, the operational
Right.
capability and the process. Because banks have been used to over the last 10 years big change and big movements and big releases and everything that comes with that, and which is inherently is risk, big risk every time you
Right.
do a significant deployment. And I think to your point, the exciting thing with this is that actually at the point where everything becomes small, as in small changes, small increments, small cost involved in doing these things, as opposed to, I remember 3 months of regression testing for people to deploy things was like a thing,
Right.
right? And no
Yes.
wonder you never saw changes. So, I mean, the knock-on effects all the way through an organization of changing the way in which you create your infrastructure, but also how you deploy that to customers is so significant, isn't it?
It is, and we're seeing, banks have been studying for net, and I brought Netflix up before, but studying the way Netflix does, um, you know, um, code deployment and
Mm,
how they do that and how they do their testing, and you know, again, banks are looking at those technology innovations and saying, how can we integrate this into our environment? Because to your point, it reduces the risk overall. Instead of having these big software releases that come every 3 to 6 months, and then, like you said, all this testing, doing small increments and being able to have a self-healing environment in the way that Netflix does, or some of these other technology providers, makes them, overall resilient and reduces their risk.
yeah, it's interesting. I can't remember whose law it is, somebody far smarter than me, but it was, you are the manifestation of the technology that you have. So your processes,
Right.
your operations, your culture is really a manifestation of the infrastructure from a process perspective that you have. And the more you start to see people really adopt cloud technology in this major way, then actually you see the oscillations of their operation capability just speeding up and speeding up and speeding up. I mean, I guess as a question to you more broadly, I mean, cloud technology has come such a long way in such a short period of time. It seems like we've gone from, banks saying, yes, but, I'm going to wait 10
Yep.
years and see what happens. I mean, it feels like in the last 2, we've come further than the last 10. So where do you see us getting in the next 5 years with this?
I think we're going to see a lot more adoption, especially for critical workloads.
Mm,
Banks have been using cloud, but it's for non-critical workloads. I think we're going to see more of the critical workloads moving to that environment, moving as sort of outside of the bank's data center, so to speak. And we're going to see a lot more innovation at a faster pace.
Fantastic. Well, I mean, for all of those organizations out there that, again, if you're a big bank who don't think that you can compete with fintechs in this space because of the movement, it's changes like this that really sort of make it happen. So, I think the rate in which technology is coming to market and being commoditized is really making banks feel comfortable with using these things. So it's fantastic to see and great to see you guys having so much success on it. Like I say, picking a few small banks to start with regards to Bank of America, BNP, and MUFG over in Japan, it's a pretty significant starting point, isn't it?
It is. It is. And like I said, we're seeing not only from the large institutions, but the smaller institutions, there's a huge amount of interest in seeing this be successful.
Fantastic. All right, guys. Well, we're coming to the top of the hour, so I know. I mean, it's nearly the end of the day in the UK. It's definitely the beginning of it over in the US. So, thank you so much for joining us, Judith, and taking the time to come and talk to us. I think the walking tour of your barn will start on the top of the hour. So, I look forward to joining that one as well. But if anybody wants to hear more about this collaboration and make use of the cloud technology themselves, if you head over to https://ibm.co/2R2HVVX. That will give you an overview of actually how this works. It's a very difficult to remember URL, so we'll post that into the comments so you guys can take a look. But it's really, really interesting to see this collaboration and super interesting to see the impact of it as well. So thank you very much for everybody for joining us today. Judith, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. Where can people find out a little bit more about you and a little bit more about the work that you do?
Yeah, no, definitely at the IBM URL you just mentioned. You can also look me up on LinkedIn and on our promontory.com webpage.
Fantastic. Well, that's all we have for you time today. Tomorrow, it won't be me, but Mr. Samuel will be back on the US show, which is going to be at 10:30 ET or 3:30 BST for our British viewers. He's going to be talking to Craig Sachs, who is the Chief Strategy and Transformation Officer over at ACI Worldwide. Should be a super, super interesting show. So have a great day, everybody, and we will see you tomorrow. Goodbye.